What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a chapter of human history so cruel it makes modern prisons look like luxury hotels. Welcome to the world of medieval dungeons. Dungeons didn't appear overnight. They evolved slowly, deliberately from simple holding cells into machines of human suffering. It all began around 800 AD under Emperor Charlemagne. His new laws mentioned underground chambers used to hold criminals before trial. They were meant to be temporary. But soon, rulers discovered a dark secret that prolonged imprisonment was far more effective than a quick death. By 1000 AD, nearly every castle and monastery in Europe had some form of dungeon. But the real transformation came in 1252, when Pope Innocent IV issued a decree called Ad Extirpanda, officially allowing torture to extract confessions from heretics. This was no rogue act. It was church policy. Torture became holy duty, a way to save souls through pain. Faith had become the perfect weapon. From that moment, dungeons were no longer about justice. They were about control. Every dungeon was a carefully engineered nightmare. No windows. No light. No air. Walls curved inward to create claustrophobia. The deeper you went, sometimes 40 feet underground, the less likely anyone could hear you scream. Builders competed to outdo each other. Some created false floors that collapsed into spike pits. Others built acoustic chambers that made every drip of water echo like thunder, psychological torture at its finest. The most feared invention? The oubliette, French for the forgotten place. A bottle-shaped pit carved into rock, accessible only from above. Prisoners were lowered in and abandoned. No trial. No sentence. Just darkness and time. Entering an oubliette meant one thing: you were already dead. The world had simply stopped acknowledging it. Medieval justice worked on a single principle: the punishment must be worse than the crime. But what counted as a crime? Practically anything. The top were crimes against God: heresy, witchcraft, blasphemy. Accused of heresy? Your denial was proof of guilt. Women accused of witchcraft faced impossible odds. A bad harvest or a dying cow was enough to seal their fate. Even Joan of Arc was burned alive, not for treason, but for wearing men's clothing. Then came crimes against nobility. Treason could mean rebellion or just failing to bow correctly. William Wallace, yes, the Braveheart hero, was tortured for 6 hours before execution. And yet, stealing property worth 12 pence could get you hanged, while killing a man in a duel might earn only a fine. In the Middle Ages, property mattered more than life. Women were punished for speaking too loudly, for walking alone at night, even for defending themselves. The scold's bridle, a metal cage locked around a woman's head, silenced those deemed too opinionated. Even poverty itself was a crime. Begging, homelessness, unemployment, all punishable by imprisonment or death. And children as young as 7 years old could be tortured or executed. Civilization, it seemed, had forgotten its humanity. Dungeons weren't just prisons, they were entire societies, hidden beneath the earth. Prisoners formed hierarchies. The rich and powerful political captives, nobles, or knights lived in slightly better cells. They received bread, water, even straw bedding. Their lives had ransom value. When King Richard the Lionheart was captured returning from the Crusades, he was held for 2 years in comfort while his mother raised an enormous ransom. His suffering was calculated just enough to make his family pay faster. But for the rest, the commoners, the poor, the forgotten, there was no mercy. 20 people crammed into cells built for 5. Moldy bread, foul water, no daylight. Most died within weeks. Women suffered doubly: used, abused, and discarded. Pregnant prisoners often died during childbirth. Infants rarely survived even a few days. Children were treated no differently. Some traded their bodies for scraps of food. Others simply faded into silence. The rich and powerful political captives, nobles, or knights lived in slightly better cells. They received bread, water, even straw bedding. Their lives had ransom value. When King Richard the Lionheart was captured returning from the Crusades, he was held for 2 years in comfort while his mother raised an enormous ransom. His suffering was calculated just enough to make his family pay faster. But for the rest, the commoners, the poor, the forgotten, there was no mercy. What if I told you that medieval dungeons weren't prisons at all, but death chambers disguised as justice? Movies might show you dark stone rooms, straw beds, and iron bars, but the truth was far more terrifying. These underground hells were designed not just to punish, but to break human beings' body, mind, and spirit before killing them slowly. 85% of those thrown into medieval dungeons died within weeks, not by execution, but by disease, starvation, and despair. Over time, the dungeon became its own ecosystem of cruelty, where the strong preyed on the weak, and guards sold survival at a price. Humanity rotted alongside the flesh. Torture wasn't chaos, it was science. Pain had been studied, measured, refined. For religious crimes, the goal was to destroy the soul before the body. The strappado tied a victim's hands behind their back, hoisted them into the air, and dropped them, suddenly ripping shoulders from sockets. The Spanish boot crushed leg bones slowly, screw by screw. Witnesses heard bones crack long before victims lost consciousness. Political crimes were punished publicly. Drawing and quartering turned execution into theater, dragged through the streets, hanged half to death, disemboweled, beheaded, and dismembered, each act symbolizing complete destruction of identity. For moral crimes like adultery or prostitution, humiliation was part of the punishment. But the greatest killer of all wasn't the torturer. It was disease. Overcrowded, airless dungeons became breeding grounds for plague, typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis. The Black Death alone killed up to 200 million people, and prisoners were hit hardest. They couldn't flee, couldn't wash, couldn't survive. Typhus, spread by lice, became known as jail fever. Dysentery turned human waste into death traps. And malnutrition made even small wounds fatal. Scurvy rotted gums and reopened old scars. Gangrene made the air itself smell of death. Bodies were dragged out weekly if anyone remembered .no names. No graves. No prayers. Sometimes disease was even used deliberately. Overcrowding wasn't negligence, it was policy. The system had learned that neglect kills cheaper than torture. Some dungeons became infamous monuments to organized evil. The Tower of London was the crown jewel of terror. It turned punishment into theater, a stage for royal power. Queen Anne Boleyn was executed there, just 3 years after her coronation, in the same halls. Her fall was designed for spectacle. Thomas More, the scholar who wrote Utopia, was imprisoned there, too starved, isolated, and slowly destroyed for refusing to acknowledge the king's supremacy. In France, the Bastille became a symbol of royal tyranny. The king could imprison anyone, no trial, no reason, just a sealed letter. Some vanished for decades, their families never knowing their fate. The man in the iron mask, held over 30 years, embodied this horror, his identity erased, his face hidden from the world forever. And in Rome, the Castle Sant'Angelo turned a pagan emperor's tomb into the Pope's private dungeon. Philosopher Giordano Bruno spent 8 years there before being burned alive for believing the universe had infinite worlds. In the H2DF and H2 Danasi, water itself became the weapon, flooding chambers, rising inch by inch, driving prisoners mad long before they drowned. Cruelty had become craftsmanship. Medieval dungeons weren't just about punishment, they were about power. They showed what happens when authority loses empathy and faith justifies suffering. These places remind us that civilization is fragile, that justice, unchecked, can turn into machinery of terror. So next time you see an old castle, remember that beneath those stone floors once lay rooms where humanity disappeared, one scream at a time.